In the summer of 1995, 7 cousins vanished from the small Texas town of Ash Hollow. They were last seen walking along County Road 6 after a family bonfire. No bodies were ever found, no suspects ever charged. For 27 years, the Hollow has lived with the same unanswered question. How do 7 people disappear together and leave no trace behind? Tonight, we go back to where it began, the night the Hollow went silent. Subscribe for more true crime mysteries that dig where memory won't. Ash Hollow, Texas, July 4th, 1995. The air that night carried the heavy sweetness of honeysuckle and the distant thump of fireworks from the next town over. Out here, surrounded by low hills and the stretch of black pasture land, the sky felt bigger than anything human. 7 cousins, teenagers mostly, except for one little girl, moved like silhouettes through the half-lit fields. A bonfire flickered behind them, its light dying down to embers. They had left the adults still talking on the porch, the radio low, the sound of Hank Williams drifting through the heat. The cousins laughed as they walked, their flashlight beams slicing through the darkness. The youngest, Addie, only 9, tried to keep up with her older brother Cal, who was 17 and half bored with being anyone's babysitter. He promised her fireflies and ghost stories by the creek. They were all bound by blood and summer boredom. Cal and Addie Miller, Eli and Jessa Rourke, Mason and Carolyn Lee, and Ben Harper, the oldest at 19, home from his first semester of college, tall, quiet, a little different since he came back. They followed the narrow trail that wound through the trees to the old Ash Hollow Bridge, where the locals said you could still hear the creek whispering even when the water ran dry. "Let's take one last picture," Caroline said, fishing out a disposable Kodak camera from her bag. The flash burst, a bright, brief star in the dark, catching 7 faces frozen in laughter. That was the last known photograph of any of them. By morning, the bridge was empty. The Miller family woke to the sound of dogs barking and found only a dropped flashlight and a trail of footprints that ended abruptly near the creek bed. The sheriff's men searched for weeks, on horseback, with dogs, with helicopters that scoured the fields. They found nothing. No blood, no torn fabric, no bodies. The story made the local papers for months before fading into the static of unsolved mysteries. Families left town. Houses went dark. By 2001, only a handful of residents still spoke about the Hollow 7 at all. 27 years later, Ash Hollow had become a place people passed through without stopping. Gas station, closed diner, one blinking traffic light. But that summer, something strange happened. Eli Rourke's driver's license, the same one he'd had in 1995, was found in a sealed storm drain 10 miles from the old bridge. The lamination was warped, the photo sun-faded, but the name and date of birth were unmistakable. The town sheriff called it an anomaly. The families called it a message. And Clara Miller, now a journalist in her 30s, and Addie's cousin, the only one who hadn't been at the bonfire that night, called it something else entirely. The beginning of the end of the silence. She hadn't been back to Ash Hollow in over 20 years, but the moment she saw that ID on the news, she packed her recorder, camera, and notebooks. Because some part of her had always known that night wasn't finished. The 2-lane highway into Ash Hollow curved through miles of empty pasture, each turn revealing more of the same. Bleached fences, dead mesquite, and the hollow skeletons of old barns. To the west, the sun had just begun its slow collapse, tinting everything in rust and orange. Clara Miller drove with both hands tight on the wheel, the same white-knuckled way her father had driven during storms. The dashboard clock glowed 6:42 p.m. Her rental car smelled faintly of new leather and coffee. She hadn't finished 3 hours back. For a long stretch of the drive, she saw no other cars, just the landscape folding into itself, wide and flat, as far as her eyes could follow. She had forgotten how lonely this road was, forgotten how the silence here could become a sound of its own. A rusted green sign appeared ahead, half obscured by weeds. Ash Hollow. Papitop, 812. Someone had shot through the number with a rifle. Her throat tightened as she passed it. She'd been 16 the last time she saw that sign, in the back seat of her parents' Buick, her mother crying quietly beside her. They'd left after the disappearances, after Addie, after everything, and never come back. Now, 27 years later, she was returning as a journalist, with a camera case and a voice recorder, chasing the very story that had destroyed her family. She wasn't sure whether that made her brave or cruel. The town hadn't changed much. The gas station still leaned at the corner of Main and Birch, its single pump rusted and sun-beaten. Across from it stood a boarded-up diner, the old neon sign faintly visible under dust. Della's Eats. She parked beside the general store, one of the few businesses still open, and killed the engine. The air was hot, heavy with the scent of asphalt. Crickets screamed in the weeds. Inside the store, a bell jingled above the door. A man behind the counter, maybe 50, bald, wearing a sheriff's department t-shirt, looked up. "Help you?" "I'm looking for Sheriff Colby," Clara said, adjusting her bag strap. "He called me this morning." The man studied her a moment, then nodded. "You're the cousin, then?" "Yes, Clara Miller." He motioned toward the small office in the back. "He's expecting you." Sheriff Colby was a tall man, with a weathered face and deep-set eyes that suggested he hadn't slept well in years. His desk was stacked with papers, old case folders spread like a fan. He stood when she entered. "Miss Miller," he said, extending a calloused hand. "Didn't think you'd actually come." "I almost didn't," she admitted. "But when I saw the report about Eli Rourke's license..." He nodded and reached into a file. "You'll want to see it yourself." He placed the evidence bag on the desk. Inside, the plastic was warped from moisture, but the ID was clearly visible. The face was young, smiling, eyes bright, with a kind of confidence that only comes before life teaches loss. "That's Eli," Clara whispered, her voice catching. "God, he hasn't changed in my mind at all." "We found it inside a storm drain by County Road 6, Colby said. "The exact one that runs toward the Hollow Bridge." Clara frowned. "You think someone put it there recently?" "Hard to say. The drain's been sealed for years, could have been washed in by the floods, or someone opened it again." She stared at the ID. The lamination had peeled at the corners, but the photo still seemed to look right at her, alive somehow. "I've gone over that case 100 times, Colby continued. "Your cousins, the Hollow 7. It's the strangest disappearance I've ever seen. No tracks, no sign of a struggle. It's like they just stepped off the earth." "They didn't," Clara said softly. "No one just disappears." Colby studied her for a moment. "You planning to dig this up again officially? Write something?" "Yes," she said. "For true South crimes. I want to document the investigation that never happened properly." "You'll stir up ghosts," he warned. She met his gaze. Maybe that's the point. By nightfall, she had checked into the only motel left in town, the Longhorn Inn, a squat single-story building with peeling white paint and a Coke machine that hummed like an insect. Her room smelled faintly of bleach and air conditioning. She placed her recorder on the table, pressed the red button, and began to speak. her voice steady but low. July 12th, 2022. Returning to Ash Hollow, Texas, 27 years since my cousins disappeared. Sheriff confirms new evidence. Eli's license. Locals still won't talk. I can feel the silence, like the town is holding its breath. She paused, looking at herself in the mirror across the room. The lamp cast a yellow halo over her face. Every story has an origin, she said quietly. And this one begins with a bridge. She turned off the recorder. Outside, the cicadas roared. At dawn, Clara drove out to the old hollow bridge. The road narrowed, cracked from heat and time. Grass had reclaimed the shoulders, and the skeletal remains of the guardrails leaned outward over the dry creek. She parked and stepped out. The air smelled of dust and iron. The bridge looked smaller than she remembered. Warped boards and rusted bolts, the kind of place that creaks even when no one is walking. She walked slowly to the center, where the boards bent under her feet. A fragment of blue ribbon still clung to one of the railings, faded, frayed. Someone must have tied it there long ago as a memorial. She reached out, fingers brushing it, and felt an odd chill. It wasn't superstition. It was memory. She saw flashes. Cal's grin as he lit the bonfire. Addie chasing fireflies. Caroline taking the last photo. She'd been supposed to go that night, but had stayed home sick. Her father used to call that luck. Clara had always called it punishment. A soft rustle behind her broke the silence. She turned. A man stood at the far end of the bridge, maybe late 60s, wearing a denim jacket despite the heat. His skin was weathered, his eyes a dull gray. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said. Clara straightened. "Do I know you?" He took a few steps closer. "You're one of the Millers. I can see it in your face. Yes." He stopped, staring past her toward the creek bed. "They say the hollow keeps what it's owed." "Excuse me." He pointed toward the ground beneath the bridge. "Down there. The dirt doesn't hold water right. Something underneath drinks it first." Clara felt the small hairs rise on her arms. "Who are you?" He smiled faintly. "Just someone who remembers." Before she could reply, he turned and walked back toward the road, disappearing behind the line of trees. She stared after him, her heart pounding, the words echoing in her mind. The dirt doesn't hold water right. When she finally looked back down at the dry creek, something caught the morning light. A glint half buried in the silt. Clara knelt, brushing away dust. It was a small metal object, rusted and bent, but she recognized the emblem. The pendant from Caroline Lee's necklace, a silver locket with the shape of a sparrow engraved on it. Her hands began to shake. She turned the locket over. The hinge had cracked, but it still opened. Inside, behind the faded glass, was a photograph. The same one from that last night, the cousins laughing around the bonfire. Except this time, there was an eighth figure standing at the edge of the light, barely visible. Someone who hadn't been there before. The morning heat rose fast, a shimmering curtain over the bridge. Clara crouched there for a long time, staring at the photo inside the locket, until the air itself seemed to waver. 7 cousins laughing around the bonfire, and, at the far left edge of the frame, just inside the glow, a tall figure in shadow. Too tall to be Addie, too broad-shouldered to be one of the girls. The shape of a man. She squinted, heart hammering. The head was turned slightly away from the camera, but even in the grainy image, she thought she saw something. A blur. Maybe a face half caught by the flash, too indistinct to name. The edges of the picture were warped from heat, the paper delicate as ash. She closed the locket carefully and slipped it into her bag, trying to steady her breathing. She had come for answers, not ghosts. But suddenly the line between them felt thinner than she'd imagined. Back at the motel, Clara spread her findings across the small table. Her camera, the recorder, the locket. The morning light came in pale through thin curtains, striping everything gold and dust. She powered up her laptop, loaded the scanned photo from the locket, and zoomed in. The pixels blurred into noise, but the dark outline remained unmistakable. Someone had been standing at the tree line, watching. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "This is Clara." A man's voice came through, rough-edged, older. "You were at the bridge this morning." Her pulse spiked. "Who is this?" A pause. "I told you. The hollow keeps what it's owed." Her grip tightened on the phone. "You followed me." "I saw you pick something up," he said. "That locket. You should put it back." "Why?" "Because some things down there don't stay buried for a reason." The line clicked dead. For a moment she just stared at the phone, listening to the silence that followed, thick as static. Then she hit record on her voice memo app and began speaking. July 13th, 9:04 a.m. Unidentified male caller. Warned me to leave the locket. Knew I was at the bridge. Knows I took it. Either local surveillance or someone watching. Her voice trembled, despite her effort to sound professional. She shut off the recorder and glanced at the window. Nothing but the stretch of empty parking lot, the blacktop rippling in the heat. Still, she pulled the curtains closed. By noon, she drove to the county archive in the next town over. A red brick building that smelled of dust, ozone, and the faint tang of mildew. The records clerk, a thin woman with sharp features and a chain of reading glasses around her neck, led her to a small research room. "Microfilms all there," the woman said. Local paper, the Hollow Gazette, ran heavy coverage that summer. Clara thanked her, set up the machine, and began scrolling through the headlines. July 6, 1995. 7 cousins missing in Ash Hollow. Families plead for information. Search enters second week with no leads. Photo after photo. Black and white images of search parties, dogs, deputies on horseback. And in each, a blur of people behind the caution tape. Faces turned toward the camera, expressions unreadable. One image stopped her cold. It was taken near the bridge, the same night as the search, and in the background stood a man near a tree line, a shape eerily similar to the one in the locket photo. Tall, still, watching. The caption read, "Volunteers gather as night search begins. No names listed." She took a photo of the screen with her phone, comparing it side by side with the locket image. The resemblance was undeniable. She leaned back in the chair, mind racing. If this man had been there during both the bonfire and the search, he wasn't random. He was part of the story. And somehow no one had ever noticed. That evening, she went to the small bar off Main Street, the only place in town where people still talked freely after a drink or two. The sign above the door flickered, Deke's Tavern. Inside, it smelled of beer and old wood. A jukebox in the corner played something slow and twangy. She ordered a soda, scanned the room. A few locals, mostly older men, faces she didn't recognize, until one did. At a table near the back sat a man with the same weathered look as the stranger from the bridge. Denim jacket, hat low over his eyes. She approached slowly. "Mind if I sit?" He didn't look surprised, just gestured to the chair across from him. "You shouldn't have come back, Miss Miller," he said. She sat anyway. "You've been watching me." He sipped his drink. "You're stirring something that wants to stay sleeping." "Then, you know what happened that night?" she pressed. "You were there." His jaw tightened. "I was younger then. Working at the feed store. Saw those kids walk down toward the bridge around midnight and—" He stared at the tabletop, thumb rubbing the rim of his glass. There was someone else with them. Man I didn't recognize. Thought he was maybe one of their uncles. Her heart skipped. Can you describe him? Tall. Wore a dark coat, even in the heat. Stood a bit apart, like he didn't belong. He looked up finally. Next morning, the sheriff asked if I'd seen anything strange. I told him. He said nobody else had. Told me to stop spreading stories. Clara leaned forward. You never told anyone else. He shook his head. People around here stopped listening. Said I was drunk or seeing ghosts. But I know what I saw. Who was he? The man hesitated. Then he said quietly, Name was Jonas Hale. Used to live out near the quarry. They found his truck burned a week after the kids vanished. Nobody ever found him either. Clara's mind reeled. You're telling me there were 8 missing that summer? He gave a dry chuckle. That's the part they don't print in papers. That night in her motel room, Clara couldn't sleep. She kept replaying his words. Jonas Hale. The name had the weight of something buried, like an echo from under stone. She opened her laptop, pulled up the archived database of missing persons, typed in the name. No results. She tried again with variations. Jonas Hales, Jonah Hale, J. Hale. Nothing. It was as if the man had never existed. The only mention she could find came from a 1993 property deed. A small cabin listed under his name near the Ash Hollow quarry, 2 miles from where the cousins had vanished. She printed the coordinates and traced the route on an old map spread across the desk. Tomorrow, she would go there. Morning came gray and heavy with fog, rare for this part of Texas. She packed her camera, recorder, flashlight, and gloves, and drove north toward the quarry. The road narrowed into gravel, then dirt, bordered by twisted oak and scrub. The land out here felt abandoned. No mailboxes, no power lines, no sound except her tires crunching over stone. Finally, she saw it. A small cabin half hidden behind a cluster of trees. The roof sagged, boards gray with rot. She parked, stepped out. The air was cooler here, damp with the scent of earth and something metallic. Rust or blood, she couldn't tell. Her boots sank slightly into the soil as she walked toward the porch. The front door hung open a few inches, swaying with each breath of wind. Inside, the light was dim. Dust motes swirled in the air. A table sat overturned, empty cans, old tools, the remains of a life left mid-motion. On the wall, someone had scratched lines into the wood. 7 vertical marks, and then one crossed through them all like a slash. Her throat went dry. She raised her camera and snapped a photo. In the corner, something glinted. A jar, glass, clouded with dirt. Inside it, folded paper. She pulled on her gloves, unscrewed the lid, and carefully unfolded the note. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting rough, but legible. It read, They came to me in the dark. Said the hollow was hungry again. I told them no. Told them it had been paid once. But they said the blood runs thin, and the creek runs dry. July 4th. They will take what is owed. A shiver coursed through her. Suddenly a noise behind her. The creak of the porch. She turned, heart hammering. A shadow passed across the doorway. The faint outline of someone tall, standing perfectly still. Who's there? She called. No answer. She stepped closer, the boards groaning under her feet. Outside, the fog had thickened, swallowing the trees. She could see nothing beyond a few yards. Hello? The silence felt alive. Then, from somewhere in the gray distance, came a faint whistle, a low, melodic tune, like someone calling a dog home. She froze, because she knew that melody. Addie used to whistle it, the summer before she vanished. Clara stumbled back inside, slammed the door, and locked it. Her breathing came fast, shallow. She checked her phone. No one signal. The whistling stopped. A few minutes later, she forced herself to the window. The fog was lifting. The clearing stood empty again. But in the dirt near her car tires, she saw footprints. 2 sets. One leading toward the cabin, one leading away. And beside them, a child's shoe print. The fog burned away fast once the sun rose, leaving a harsh, dry brightness over the land. Clara waited until full daylight before stepping outside the cabin again. Her heart hadn't slowed since the night before. The sound of that faint whistling still lodged behind her ribs. She crouched by the car, staring at the footprints she'd seen at dawn. The larger prints had sunk deep. The smaller ones, the child's, barely disturbed the dust. They were clear, distinct, fresh. She took photographs of both sets, measured them against her own. The child's print was small, maybe a size 3. The adult's prints led back toward the tree line, vanishing where the grass thickened. Her instinct told her to leave, drive back to town, hand everything over to Sheriff Colby. Her journalist's mind said no, not yet. The cabin was part of this. Jonas Hale was part of this. And now she needed to know what the hollow being hungry again meant. The quarry lay just beyond the cabin, down a dirt trail lined with weeds and rusted machinery. It had been abandoned for years. The county had fenced it off after a worker's accident in the early 2000s. The chain-link gate now sagged, its lock snapped open long ago. Clara pushed through. The ground dropped sharply, revealing a bowl-shaped pit, 100 feet deep, filled not with water, but cracked clay and broken rock. The wind made a hollow, flute-like sound as it moved through the empty space. She descended carefully, one foot slipping on loose shale. At the bottom, the air was cool and still, a strange relief after the relentless Texas heat. Something glimmered near the far edge of the pit. She walked closer. A pile of stones had been stacked into a crude cairn. Someone had tied faded ribbons to a piece of rebar, driven into the top, blue, pink, yellow, like offerings. Clara knelt and brushed her fingers over the stones. Beneath them the dirt was darker, damper. The faint smell of decay rose up. She swallowed hard. "God," she whispered. Her camera clicked once, the shutter echoing sharply in the stillness. That was when she noticed the carvings on the rocks. Faint, jagged scratches, forming symbols she didn't recognize. Triangular shapes, intersecting lines, and what looked like a circle crossed by 3 slashes. The same mark from Jonas Hale's cabin wall. Her pulse climbed. She took a step back and almost tripped over a small metal object, half buried in the ground. She crouched again, brushing it clean. It was a button, tarnished and rusted, the kind sewn onto denim jackets. Clara turned it in her fingers. There was an engraving on it. H. L. Harper Lee, she thought suddenly. One of the missing cousins. Ben Harper Lee, the oldest. She pocketed the button, her stomach tightening. Then a new sound drifted through the quarry. A crunch of gravel above. She looked up. Someone was standing at the rim, backlit by sunlight. The figure raised a hand, motionless for a moment, then slowly pointed toward her. Clara froze. "Hello?" she called. No response. She blinked, and the figure was gone. Back in town, Sheriff Colby didn't like what he heard. "You went out there alone?" His voice cracked through the small office like a whip. "Jesus, Clara. That place isn't safe. It's county property." "I found something," she said, sliding the photos across his desk. The carvings, the ribbons, the cairn. "And this note, from Jonas Hale's cabin." He read it slowly, brow furrowing deeper with each line. "You shouldn't have this. It's evidence Evidence of what? Of a man who went off his rocker, he said flatly. Hale was known around here for spinning stories about the hollow taking people, about the land being cursed. He scared folks. When those kids went missing, half the town blamed him. And the other half? They left. He closed the file and met her eyes. You want the truth? We searched that cabin back in '95. Found the same markings on the wall. No bodies, no blood. Nothing that tying him directly to the kids. The case went cold. Clara leaned forward. Then why did no one mention him in the reports? Not one article, not one statement. Because the families didn't want more pain, Colby said quietly. Because the town needed it to end. She exhaled slowly, anger flaring under her ribs. Or because someone made sure it disappeared. Colby's expression hardened. Careful what you're suggesting, Miss Miller. Outside the station, the sun was merciless. Clara leaned against her car, head throbbing. The town felt wrong today. Too quiet, too watchful. Every curtain seemed to twitch when she passed. She stopped at the old churchyard, one of the only green spaces left in Ash Hollow. Beneath the oaks, 7 crosses stood in a neat row. Memorials for the cousins, each engraved with a name and a date of disappearance. She ran her fingers across Addie's name, the smallest cross. The wood was warm under her touch. She remembered the sound of Addie's laugh, high and clear, chasing fireflies around the porch that last night. Then, faintly from somewhere beyond the trees, she heard the whistling again, the same tune. She turned sharply. The sound stopped. Her skin prickled. When she looked back at the crosses, she noticed something else. A small, fresh bouquet of wildflowers at the base of Addie's memorial. Blue bonnets. Someone had been here recently. She bent to pick one up and saw, half buried in the dirt beside the flowers, a photograph corner. She brushed it clean. The image was faded, but she recognized it instantly. The same bonfire picture again. Only this time, the 8th figure was clearer. The man's face visible now, in the print's decay. A gaunt, hollow-eyed man with dark hair and a faint scar across his temple. Jonas Hale. That night, Clara spread both photographs side by side on the motel bed. The one from the Locket and the one she'd just found. The resemblance was exact. The air conditioner hummed. A low, mechanical heartbeat. She pressed record. July 14th. Second photo recovered. Clearer evidence of 8th presence at Bonfire. Confirms Jonas Hale was there. Confirms he was with them that night. She paused. The question is, why did no one ever mention him? And how did his name disappear from every record? She turned off the recorder and stared at the photos until her eyes blurred. The clock read 11:37 p.m. when a knock came at the door. Soft 3 times. She froze. Another knock. "Who is it?" she called. No answer. She stood, careful, silent. The peephole revealed only darkness. After a long minute, she cracked the door open an inch. The parking lot lay empty, but on the ground outside her door was a folded piece of paper. She picked it up, hands trembling. Inside, written in rough pencil, "You're asking the wrong people. Ask who built the bridge." The next morning, Clara drove to the county records office. She spent hours combing through old construction logs, land surveys, and tax files from the 1960s onward. Finally, buried in a file marked Infrastructure, County Road 6 Bridge, 1989. She found it. Product lead contractor, Hale Construction Company. Supervisor, Jonas E. Hale. He hadn't just been near the bridge, he had built it. Her skin went cold. Attached to the file was a typed note, unsigned. Bridge completion delayed due to subsidence issues. Soil collapse during pour. 2 workers injured. 1 reported missing. Cause unresolved. She stared at the word missing. The edges of the page trembled slightly in her hand. This wasn't a coincidence. Jonas had built the bridge, and 6 years later, 7 children vanished there. The same land, the same man, the same silence. That night she returned to the bridge again, this time with her recorder running from the car dashboard. The crickets sang loud in the dark. Fireflies blinked over the weeds. She stood in the center, flashlight beam trembling on the wood. "This is where it started," she whispered. "The man who built this bridge also disappeared. So did 7 children. Maybe this bridge wasn't built to cross something. Maybe it was built to feed it." The air shifted. A cold gust rolled down the creek bed, carrying the faint smell of rain and something metallic. Clara felt the boards vibrate under her feet, soft, rhythmic, almost like breathing. She stepped back, heart hammering. Then, just at the edge of her light, she saw it. A figure standing beneath the bridge, half in shadow. "Hello," she called. The figure didn't move. She took one cautious step closer, angling the flashlight down. The beam caught a pale face looking up at her. Eyes wide, mouth open, not in fear but in surprise. It was Sheriff Colby. "Clara," he said, voice echoing strangely. "You shouldn't—" And then the boards beneath her feet cracked. The world dropped. The moment the bridge gave way, time seemed to slow. Clara's breath caught in her throat. As the world tilted, wood snapped under her boots, her flashlight spun away, and she plunged into darkness. The air rushed around her in a violent rush of sound and cold. She hit water hard enough to knock the air from her lungs. For a moment, she didn't know which way was up. The creek was deeper than it had looked. A swollen pit where the rainwater had collected, black and freezing. She kicked and clawed her way to the surface, gasping. The flashlight beam flickered somewhere underwater, before dying completely. "Colby!" she shouted, coughing. "Sheriff!" No answer. The only sound was the wind moving through the trees above, and the relentless hiss of the creek. She dragged herself to the muddy bank, trembling, soaked through. Her ankle throbbed, maybe twisted on impact. For a long minute she sat there, staring up at the shattered bridge overhead. One of the support beams had collapsed, taking part of the railing with it. The sheriff was gone. "Colby!" she shouted again, louder this time. Still nothing. Clara forced herself to stand, wincing as her ankle protested. Her phone was soaked, but miraculously still worked. She flicked on the flashlight feature and aimed it at the creek. Something floated near the collapsed beam. At first she thought it was debris, but as the light steadied, she saw a sleeve, dark brown sheriff's uniform fabric. Her stomach turned. Oh, God! She limped toward the edge and waded in again, the cold biting through her jeans. The current tugged at her legs, strong and insistent. When she reached the beam, she grabbed hold and realized the arm attached to that sleeve was empty from the shoulder down. The fabric had torn clean through. She stumbled back, breathing hard. No body, just the torn sleeve. Something had ripped it away. By the time she made it back to her car, dawn was breaking pale over the horizon. Clara sat shivering in the driver's seat, replaying the moment over and over. Colby's face appearing beneath the bridge, his warning, the sudden collapse. Her recorder had stopped when she fell, but the last few seconds of audio survived. She hit play. "This is where it started," her voice said. "The man who built this bridge also disappeared. So did 7 children." A pause, then Colby's faint voice, "Clara, you shouldn't." And then the sound of wood splintering, followed by rushing water. She listened again, this time more carefully. In the background before Colby spoke, she heard something else, a low, rhythmic tone, almost like humming. A second voice. She turned up the volume. It wasn't humming, it was whistling. The same tune she'd heard at the cabin, at the churchyard. Someone else had been there that night. At 9 a.m., she limped into the Ash Hollow Medical Clinic. The nurse on duty stared at her mud-soaked clothes and swollen ankle. "What happened to you?" "Bridge collapsed," Clara said. "Sheriff Colby was with me." The nurse's expression changed immediately. "He was supposed to be at the station this morning." Clara nodded grimly. "He's not." Within minutes, 2 deputies arrived. They asked questions fast, overlapping each other. What time did it happen? Who else was there? What exactly did she see? She answered what she could, leaving out only one detail: the whistling. She wasn't ready to share that part yet. When she returned to the motel, yellow caution tape already cordoned off her door. The window had been shattered, glass scattered across the carpet. The bed was stripped bare. Her recorder was gone. So was the photograph of the cousins. By early afternoon, the entire town buzzed with whispers: "Sheriff Colby missing." Out-of-town journalists questioned: "Old bridge collapses. Possible foul play." Clara sat in her car outside the diner, watching people come and go. The bell over the door jingled every few seconds. Her reflection in the windshield looked pale and hollow-eyed. The waitress from before, the one who'd been 12 when the cousins vanished, stepped outside for a smoke. When she saw Clara, she hesitated, then walked over. "Word is, you were the last to see the sheriff," she said softly. "That's what they'll say, yeah," Clara replied. The woman flicked ash into the gravel. "He was my uncle. He always said the Hollow keeps its debts. Guess it came to collect." "What do you mean?" Clara asked. The woman looked past her toward the hills. "He found something he shouldn't have years back. Never talked about it. Just said it wasn't meant to be dug up again." "Something from the case?" A small nod. "Said the Hollow took what it was owed, and that if you listened close enough, you could hear them still calling for help." She met Clara's gaze. "You've heard it, haven't you?" Clara hesitated. "The whistling?" The woman dropped her cigarette, crushed it beneath her shoe. "Then, it's already noticed you." That evening, Clara drove to Jonas Hale's last listed address, a property outside town that the county had long since seized. The old Hale farmhouse sat deep among the cedars, its roof half collapsed, windows boarded. She parked at the gate and walked the rest of the way, flashlight slicing through the dusk. The cicadas were deafening. Every sound seemed to move too close behind her. Inside, the house smelled of rot and dust. A family portrait still hung crooked above the fireplace: Jonas, a woman, and a small boy of about 10. The boy's face was half faded, but Clara could make out the eyes, sharp, pale, watchful. She searched the house carefully: drawers, cupboards, beneath floorboards. In the master bedroom, she found a trunk filled with construction logs, invoices, and sketches. The bridge blueprints lay on top, marked with Jonas's signature, and a faint circle drawn in red pencil over one section, the center pier. She traced the circle with her fingertip. The handwriting beside it read, "Hollow Week here." Seal-reinforced a map was taped to the inside of the trunk lid, hand-drawn, crude. It showed the quarry, the bridge, and the Hale property. Between them, a curved line labeled sink route. Sinkholes, she realized. The land beneath Ash Hollow wasn't solid. It was honeycombed with old limestone caverns. The bridge hadn't been built just to cross the creek. It had been built to cap something underneath. The floorboards creaked behind her. She turned fast, heart slamming. The hallway was empty. Then came the whistling, faint, rising from somewhere below her feet. Slow, deliberate, the same tune. She aimed the flashlight downward. The The sound seemed to come from under the house. In the kitchen, she found a square of plywood, nailed over an old root cellar. The nails were new, shiny against the warped wood. Someone had sealed it recently. Her hands shook as she pried them loose, with a broken hammer from the counter. Each nail screeched as it came free. When the last one popped, a rush of cold air hit her face, carrying the smell of earth and mildew. She knelt, peering down. A ladder led into darkness. "Okay," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Okay." She descended. The cellar was larger than expected. A rough stone chamber, lined with shelves of old preserves and tools. The air was wet, heavy. Her flashlight caught movement, water dripping from the ceiling onto a muddy floor. And then, in the far corner, she saw something that made her throat close. 7 wooden crates stood in a neat row. Each had a name carved crudely into the lid. Ben, Nora, Cole, June, Lily, Addie, Ruth. Her knees buckled. The lids were nailed shut. She stepped closer, light shaking in her hand. The names were burned into the wood, not carved. The edges of the letters were blackened, charred. Beneath one of the boxes, Addie's, a thin stream of water trickled from a crack in the floor, seeping into the mud. She knelt and touched it. Cold, metallic. Then she saw the small handprint on the crate's lid, a child's, pressed into the soot. She staggered back, bile rising in her throat. From above, the cellar door slammed shut. The whistling returned, louder now, coming from the shadows behind her. She spun, flashlight beam cutting across the room. A man stood half in darkness near the crates. His clothes were tattered, his face pale, eyes sunken deep. His mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile. "Jonas Hale," she whispered. The figure tilted its head. "You shouldn't have opened it," he rasped. Then the light went out. When she woke, the air was filled with sirens. Deputies were hauling her out of the cellar, floodlights glaring against the ruined house. Someone was shouting her name. Her head throbbed. Mud streaked her arms and face. "What happened?" she asked weakly. The deputy holding her shook his head. "We found you unconscious. You called 911, but didn't say a word. Just left the line open. The signal came from here." "I didn't call," she murmured. They led her to the back of the ambulance. She glanced toward the house. The cellar entrance gaped open, floodlights spilling down into the dark. 7 boxes, she said. There were 7 boxes down there. With names, the deputy looked at her blankly. "We didn't find any boxes, ma'am. Just a collapsed floor and a lot of mud." She turned, staring. "No, they were there." He patted her shoulder gently. "You need rest." But when she looked down at her hands, she saw streaks of soot under her nails, black, faintly smelling of burned wood. And when the wind shifted, she swore she could still hear it. The soft, hollow whistle rising from the trees. The hospital room smelled of disinfectant and rain. Clara lay motionless beneath thin white sheets, her ankle bandaged, head wrapped where she'd struck the floor in the Hale cellar. She'd been found delirious, according to the medical report, dehydrated, covered in mud, with traces of soot on her hands and clothing. The police listed her statement as incoherent. She stared at the ceiling, watching the fluorescent light flicker. Her mind played the same scene over and over. 7 boxes, burned names, a man's voice whispering, "You shouldn't have opened it." Every time she blinked, she saw that cellar again. But when she tried to tell the deputies what she'd found, their faces had gone blank. "Nothing down there," one had said. "No boxes, no names, just rubble." It didn't make sense. A knock came at the door. Clara looked up to see a woman in her 50s, short dark hair, wearing a raincoat that still dripped from the storm outside. She held a notebook and a badge. "Detective Evelyn Harrow," she said, offering a polite but wary smile. "State Bureau. I'm taking over the Colby disappearance case, and whatever you stumbled into out at the Hale property." Clara pushed herself up on one elbow. "They didn't find the crates?" "Nothing but mud," Harrow confirmed, flipping open her notebook. "But we did find these on you." She pulled two items from a paper evidence bag: the button engraved HL and the Locket photograph. "You want to tell me where they came from?" Clara hesitated. "The quarry and the Hale cabin, both on condemned land," Harrow said, raising an eyebrow. "You like trespassing?" "I like answers," Clara shot back. "And you won't find any sitting behind tape lines." For a moment, the detective studied her in silence. Then she said, "You're lucky to be alive. That bridge collapse could have killed you." "Did you find him?" Clara asked quietly. "Sheriff Colby?" Harrow's expression softened, just a little. "No, not yet." "Then he's still out there." "Or he's under that creek," Harrow said. "We're draining it tomorrow to check." She turned to go, then paused at the door. "One more thing, Miss Miller. You said you saw Jonas Hale. That impossible?" "I know what I saw. Jonas Hale died in 2003, Harrow said flatly. "Heart attack. Buried in the Ash Hollow Cemetery." Clara stared after her. Then who the hell was in that cellar? By afternoon, she was discharged on crutches and sent back to the motel, which had been resecured after the break-in. Her window was boarded now, and yellow tape fluttered on the frame. She brewed coffee on the small machine by the sink and stared at the rain streaking the glass. Jonas Hale, dead since 2003. If that was true, then she'd either hallucinated or someone had gone to great lengths to impersonate him. Her recorder was still missing. So was the photo. She opened her laptop and began transcribing from memory, hands trembling as she typed. 7 cousins vanished. July 1979. Jonas Hale, builder of the bridge, prime suspect in local legend. Possible connection to Colby's disappearance 2025. Subjective visual contact with male resembling Hale. State police denial of evidence. Case remains open. Her phone buzzed. A blocked number. She hesitated, then answered. No one spoke at first. Only static. Then a man's voice, faint, rough. "You want to find them? Go back to where the water runs red." The line went dead. At dusk, the rain stopped, leaving the air thick and metallic. Clara drove toward the quarry again. The road had become a slurry of mud and gravel, her headlights cutting a narrow tunnel through the fog. Near the turnoff, she noticed a truck parked just off the shoulder, old dark blue, its plates missing. The driver's seat was empty. She slowed but didn't stop. Something in her gut told her she was being watched. The quarry looked different in the rain. Softer, edges blurred by mist. The cairn of stones she'd seen days earlier was gone. Only a depression remained in the mud where it had stood. But the ribbons were still there, torn loose, tangled in the fence wire. Blue, pink, yellow. Clara crouched and picked one up, twisting it between her fingers. Beneath it lay a small metal tag, half buried. She brushed off the dirt and read the engraving. County Infrastructure. Bridge Pier Number 3, 1989. Her pulse quickened. The bridge again. The connection was inescapable. She pocketed the tag and started back toward her car. That's when she saw the light. Faint at first. A small, steady glow from deeper inside the quarry. Someone was down there. She slid carefully along the path, mud slick beneath her shoes. The light bobbed once, twice, like a lantern moving. Then a voice drifted upward. Low, calm, male. "It's okay, Addie. You can come out now." Clara froze. The lantern light flared, and she saw him clearly. A man kneeling in the pit, back turned. He was coaxing someone from behind a boulder, his tone soft and rhythmic, like a father speaking to a child. "You can come out now. They're gone." Clara's heart pounded. She reached for her phone, switched on the camera. But when the flash caught the quarry walls, the figure turned. It was Sheriff Colby. His uniform hung in tatters, skin pale under the beam. Mud streaked his face, but his eyes were sharp and wrong. He smiled faintly, and the lantern light flickered out. "Sheriff?" Clara whispered. "You're alive?" He tilted his head, voice distant. "You shouldn't have followed me, Clara." "Where have you been?" "The hollow doesn't let go," he murmured. "You saw it too, didn't you? It wants to come back." Her breath caught. "What does?" He lifted his hand and pointed toward the ground between them. In the faint residual glow, she saw the dirt shifting, small clods collapsing inward, as if the earth itself were breathing. "Run," he said quietly. The ground gave way. She woke in darkness again, half buried in wet clay. The air smelled of blood and iron. Her hands scraped through mud as she crawled upward, lungs screaming for air. When she broke through the surface, the quarry was empty. No light, no Colby, just the sound of the wind. Her phone screen was cracked, but still faintly glowing. It read 3:17 a.m. She dragged herself to the car, shaking, and drove blindly back toward town. By sunrise, the storm had passed. Clara stopped at the cemetery on impulse, drawn by a pull she didn't fully understand. The Hale plot lay near the western fence line, a simple headstone beneath an old cedar. Jonas E. Ho, 1946 to 2003. Builder, dreamer, father. She stood there for a long time, the morning light soft through the mist. "Did you build that bridge to protect us?" she whispered. "Or to hide what you'd done?" A rustle behind her made her turn. Detective Harrow stood at the gate, raincoat draped over her arm. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I could say the same to you," Clara replied. Harrow walked up beside her, staring down at the headstone. "We drained the creek. Found the sheriff's badge. No body." Clara's throat tightened. "Then, he's still alive." "Maybe," Harrow said. "Or maybe the hollow keeps what it takes." She looked at Clara, eyes steady. "Whatever you're chasing, stop. Some things aren't meant to be uncovered." Clara met her gaze. 7 children were meant to be uncovered. For a moment, Harrow didn't answer. Then she reached into her coat pocket and handed Clara an envelope. "This was in the sheriff's safe," she said. "Might explain a few things." Inside were 7 small photographs, school portraits, aged and faded. The 7 cousins. On the back of each, written in Colby's handwriting, were numbers and dates. The most recent date was from 3 weeks ago. Beneath the stack, a single note. "Found another under pier number 3. Same as before." Clara drove straight to the bridge site, ignoring the barricades. The creek bed lay exposed now, a wide scar of mud and broken stone. County workers had cleared most of the debris, leaving only the support pylons standing like ancient bones. Pier number 3 rose near the center, a massive concrete column streaked with rust. She waded toward it, boots sinking in the muck. At its base, half buried, she saw something pale jutting from the mud. She dropped to her knees and brushed the dirt away. A bone, small, human. She swallowed hard and kept digging with her hands until she uncovered more. A partial ribcage, a child's shoe, a scrap of denim fabric with a missing button. The engraving was faint but visible. H.L. Shees sat back on her heels, rain beginning to fall again, soft and steady. The water pooled quickly around the bones, turning the mud a deep, rusted red. And from somewhere in the trees, she heard it again. That same hollow whistle, rising and falling with the wind. Back in her car, shaking, she recorded her final note of the night. The hollow wasn't cursed by chance. It was built over something older. Tunnels, maybe caverns, the bridge, the quarry, the Hale property, all along the same fault line. Jonas Hale didn't just build the bridge. He built a seal, and someone's been trying to break it ever since. She stopped the recorder and stared through the windshield. Across the road, at the edge of the woods, stood a figure, small, still, a girl, barefoot, wearing a torn dress, her hair plastered to her face with rain. She raised one arm and pointed at Clara, the same slow, deliberate motion Jonas Hale had made from the quarry rim days before. Then she was gone. The rain had not stopped for 3 straight days. In Ash Hollow, that was rare. The land usually cracked and begged for water. Now, it drowned in it. The highway shimmered like dark glass, and the trees bent low, their branches skeletal against a pewter sky. Clara drove through the storm, windshield wipers rasping in frantic rhythm. Her headlights cut narrow cones through sheets of water as she approached the bridge site again. Now, a wound in the landscape. County workers had left. The barricades stood twisted, reflective tape fluttering. A portable pump hummed somewhere near the creek bed, sending runoff water into a trench that steamed in the cold. She parked at the edge and killed the engine. The silence that followed was enormous. Her boots sank immediately in the mud. The smell of clay and oil filled the air. At the center of the site, Pier number 3 rose like an obelisk, streaked with orange rust and something darker that rain couldn't quite wash away. She switched on her recorder. July 18th. Returning to site. Weather heavy. Found evidence of remains earlier. Possibly human, possibly animal. Continuing investigation before authorities seal it again. Her voice sounded small against the storm. The excavation lights had been left behind, huge portable rigs running off generators. She clicked one on. Its beams sliced through the fog. Shadows jumped across the pylon, and the ground beneath it, freshly dug, soft, glistening red. She knelt where she had uncovered the bone earlier. Overnight, the rain had churned up more of the same pale fragments, some too small to identify, others unmistakably human. She began photographing, each flash bursting like lightning. Something gleamed in the beam, metal. She scraped with her gloved hands until she freed it. A rusted ring of keys, each stamped with a letter. The tag attached read, C. Colby. Her stomach turned. She pocketed them carefully. Then the ground trembled, faintly, one long shudder that seemed to come from underneath. The mud rippled around her knees. She looked toward the pylon. Water seeped from a crack at its base, bubbling thick and red. The pump sputtered as if choking on air. Clara rose slowly, backing away. The vibration deepened to a low hum, the same tone she'd caught on her recorder before. The hollow's voice, or something trapped inside it. "Jonas," she whispered, "is this what you were sealing?" The pylon split. A line of concrete opened with a grinding moan, releasing a rush of red water and the stench of rot. Something tumbled out, cloth, bone, a fragment of jaw. Then another, smaller shape, tangled in fabric, children's bones, 7 of them, washed into the light. Clara staggered back, hand over her mouth. The earth itself seemed to breathe beneath her, exhaling decay. Her camera clicked once before the battery died. She could barely see through the rain. And then, above the storm, came a sound she hadn't heard in days. Whistling, soft, careful. Coming from somewhere behind her. She turned. At the rim of the creek stood Sheriff Colby. His face was streaked with mud, eyes hollow, mouth drawn tight. He wore no hat now, no badge, just that torn uniform that soaked through. "Stop," he said, voice barely carrying over the rain. "You'll wake it." She took a shaky step toward him. "Wake what, Colby?" "What's down there?" He shook his head. "It was supposed to stay sealed. Jonas knew that. He tried to tell us. We laughed at him." Clara's breath came fast. "You killed him, didn't you?" Colby looked away. "He asked for help. Said the ground was moving under the pier, even before the pour set. I told him to finish the job. The county needed the bridge." His voice broke. "The night those kids went missing, I came out here. Found the hole open again. I thought maybe they'd fallen in, until I heard them singing down there." "What do you mean?" she whispered. He stared at her, eyes wide. "They weren't singing to me. They were singing for it." The ground shook harder, a deep vibration that rolled through the soles of her boots. The pylon groaned, cracks webbed upward like veins. From within something shifted, a slow, heavy movement, almost like stone grinding against bone. "Colby, run," he said. "You can't stop it. I can try." "No. You feed it every time you dig." She stepped closer, shouting over the storm. "You buried 7 children to cover it up." He flinched as if struck. "I buried what was left. Hale did the rest." "What did he do?" "He built the seal with their bones." Her mind reeled. "You're lying." He reached into his coat, pulled something out. An old photograph, edges warped by moisture. It showed the bridge under construction, men standing ankle-deep in wet cement. In the corner, barely visible, a small pile of bones on a tarp. "I tried to stop him," Colby said. "When the creek bled the first time, he said it had to be fed again, or the ground would open. I told him I'd never be part of that. He disappeared the next night. Then the kids vanished, and the hollow went quiet. For a while lightning flared, white and blinding. For an instant, Clara saw movement in the split concrete, thin shapes curling upward, like fingers. She dropped the recorder into her pocket, turned and ran. Mud sucked at her boots as she scrambled up the bank. The rain lashed sideways, turning the world into streaks of gray. Behind her, Colby's voice carried faintly, half prayer, half scream. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I'm sorry." The roar that followed drowned everything. The bridge remains collapsed entirely, sending a surge of red water down the channel. Clara threw herself behind the barricade as debris exploded outward, splinters, rebar, a cloud of steam. When the noise finally faded, only the rain remained. She lifted her head. The creek was gone, replaced by a yawning pit. The pylon lay broken, its base hollow. Nothing moved inside. No sign of Colby. Only a small swirl of blood-dark water sinking slowly into the earth. Hours later, emergency vehicles lined the road. Sirens, floodlights, uniformed figures, moving like ghosts through the mud. Detective Harrow found Clara sitting on the tailgate of an ambulance, blanket around her shoulders, skin pale as chalk. "What happened?" Harrow demanded. "The site. Half the foundation's gone." Clara met her eyes. "It wasn't just a collapse." "What then?" "An opening." Harrow frowned. "You're talking nonsense." Clara handed her the recorder, its red light still blinking. "Listen." The detective pressed play. For several seconds there was only rain and wind. Then that deep vibration, followed by Colby's voice. "He built the seal with their bones." After that, a sound neither of them could name, low, wet, and alive. Harrow's face drained of color. She stopped the tape. "Where is the sheriff now?" Clara looked toward the pit. "Gone. Like the rest of them. That night, she stayed in her car, outside the motel. unable to step inside those thin walls again. The rain had stopped. Fog hung low over the fields. She replayed the recording over and over until the battery died. Somewhere between exhaustion and dawn, she saw movement across the road, 7 silhouettes standing in the mist, small and still. One raised a hand, beckoning. She blinked. They were gone. Morning sunlight broke clear and gold. Crews were already sealing the pit, pouring new concrete, filling in the earth. Harrow watched from her car, arms crossed. Clara joined her. "You're covering it up." "I'm preventing another collapse," Harrow said. Officially, that's what this was. And unofficially? The detective's gaze stayed fixed on the workers. Officially and unofficially are the same when you want something forgotten. "You heard the recording." "I heard water and grief," Harrow said softly. "Nothing more." Clara shook her head. "You can bury it again, but it'll come back. Then leave before it does." Clara turned toward the horizon. The town, the empty highway, the endless fields beyond. She could still feel the faint vibration under her feet, like something deep below, shifting in its sleep. She started walking toward her car. The wind rose behind her, carrying a sound almost lost in it. A child's laugh. Then the soft, slow whistle, familiar, tender, and wrong. The following morning broke with a hard frost. The orchard behind the Bellamy farm shimmered in white, each branch encased in a glassy coat of ice. Nora watched it from her motel window, steam rising from her coffee, her mind still replaying the previous night's discovery. The locket, the photos, the cellar's strange markings. The air felt brittle when she stepped outside. The motel parking lot was half empty, a thin fog curling at ankle height. She drove toward the Bellamy property, the tires crunching over gravel, her breath fogging in the cold cab of the car. A police cruiser was already there. Sheriff Dalka stood by the barn, speaking with a woman wrapped in an oversized plaid coat. Nora parked and approached slowly, notebook in hand. "Morning, Miss Quinn," Dalka greeted. "This is Hazel Mercer." She worked for the Bellamys, caretaker of the orchard, till about 95. Hazel's eyes were sharp, despite the lines that webbed her face. "Heard about the digging," she was studying Nora. "Folks around here don't like to talk about what's under this ground." Nora flipped open her notebook. "You were here when the cousins disappeared?" Hazel nodded. "I was about your age back then. That summer, the orchard was still alive. Peaches, apples, plums. After they vanished, nothing would grow right. Trees withered. The soil went sour." Dalka gave Nora a sideways glance. "Locals say the land was cursed after that." "Not cursed," Hazel said quietly. "Just fed." Nora froze. "Fed?" Hazel met her gaze. "Ground doesn't keep secrets forever. It just waits until we're ready to dig." By mid-morning, Nora and the sheriff had reopened the old storage cellar near the eastern edge of the property. Inside, condensation hung in the air like mist. Wooden shelves sagged under the weight of glass jars filled with dark preserves, jam, syrup, fruit long collapsed into syrupy shadows. Dalka pointed his flashlight along the far wall. "Those scratches again," he murmured. Nora crouched beside them. The pattern was identical to the marks found beneath the floorboards, long arcs, intersecting in deliberate repetition, like someone tracing circles over and over. Only here, among the mildew and cold, a faint reddish hue stained the indentations. "Could it be rust?" she asked. Dalka scraped a small sample with his knife. The residue was dark and granular. "Rust doesn't smell like that." Nora's stomach turned. The scent, iron, sweet, faintly decayed, rose in the damp air. Dalka sealed the sample in a bag. "We'll send it to the lab in Austin." But I'll bet what you're thinking blood, Nora said. He didn't answer. They left the cellar and walked toward the edge of the orchard. Frost had begun to thaw, dripping from branches like melting glass. Hazel followed at a distance, her boots sinking into the softening ground. Your father was part of the original search team, wasn't he? Nora asked Dalka. The sheriff's jaw tightened. He was deputy then. Died in the flood of '89. We never found half the case files. Water washed them clean away. And you still think the cousins ran off? Dalka stopped walking. I think this town wanted them to. Sometimes it's easier to believe children left by choice than to face what might have happened. Hazel called out from behind them. You should check near the frost line. That's where things stay preserved longest. Dalka frowned. Preserved? But Hazel only smiled faintly, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. They began their slow sweep of the orchard, the metal detectors chirping intermittently. Hours passed. The sun climbed, burning away the fog. By noon, Nora's fingers ached from the cold. Then, at the base of an apple tree, the detector sang in a sharp, continuous tone. Dalka knelt, brushing away the layer of leaves. Beneath the soil, a dull glint of metal surfaced, a small rusted tin. He pried it open. Inside were fragments of paper, photographs warped and damp, but still visible. Children at play. 7 of them. The cousins, faces blurred by age. One photo showed them sitting around what looked like a picnic blanket near the very same orchard. Behind them stood a tall man, his face mostly shadowed by the sun. Could that be Daniel Bellamy? Nora whispered. Dalka shook his head. Daniel was shorter. That's someone else. On the back of one photograph, faded writing. June 19th, 1974. The hollow feeds. Nora's skin crawled. Feeds? Before Dalka could respond, a crack echoed across the orchard. They both turned. Hazel stood near the cellar, shotgun in hand. Step away from that tin, she said, voice trembling. Dalka raised his hands. Hazel, put the gun down. Her expression was torn between fear and defiance. You shouldn't have come back here. None of us were supposed to dig again. Who told you that? Nora asked. Hazel's eyes filled with tears. Daniel did. Before he hung himself in the barn. He said the ground would remember. The wind stirred, rustling the branches like whispers. Hazel's grip faltered, and Dalka moved fast, seizing the shotgun. She collapsed onto her knees, sobbing. It was supposed to stay buried, she said. They were all supposed to stay buried. That night, Nora sat in her motel room. The photos spread across the bed. Her recorder blinked red, recording on Nora Quinn, day 4. Hazel Mercer claims Daniel Bellamy confessed before his death, mentioned something called the hollow feeds, found possible evidence of blood traces in the cellar. All 7 cousins remain missing. If Hazel's right, their bodies may be beneath the orchard. She paused, staring at the photo of the shadowed man. The height, the posture. It didn't match Daniel Bellamy or any known relative. Her phone buzzed. A message from Sheriff Dalka. Lab report preliminary. Blood confirmed human. Source dated late 70s. Nora's breath hitched. The same decade as the disappearances. She zoomed in on the photo again. Behind the cousins in the shade of the apple trees, faint shapes, 7 mounds of disturbed earth. Or perhaps it was a trick of exposure. Either way, the orchard of Ash Hollow was no longer just a symbol of loss. It was a graveyard waiting to be unearthed. Outside, wind howled through the frost-bitten trees. The sound was almost human. The storm came in from the north that night, wind like a scream across the frozen orchard, sleet drumming on every pane of glass in Ash Hollow. Nora couldn't sleep. She sat on the motel floor with maps spread around her, marking every place connected to the cousins last summer. The Bellamy Orchard, the church on Ridge Road, the flooded quarry where the older boys used to swim. Each red circle was a wound in the landscape. Her phone buzzed near midnight. Sheriff Dalka. "You'd better get down here," he said. "Hazel Mercer's dead." By the time Nora arrived at the station, the storm had turned to freezing rain. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Dalka led her into the holding room. Hazel lay slumped on the cot, her lips pale, an empty vial of morphine at her side. "Where did she get it?" Nora asked. "Prescription from years back," Dalka said. "She must have kept some hidden." Nora stared at the woman's still face. "Suicide?" Dalka nodded grimly. "Note on the table." He handed it over. The paper was creased, the handwriting jagged but legible. "I tried to keep the promise. The orchard remembers. Forgive me." Nora felt a shiver crawl down her spine. "The orchard remembers," she whispered. "That's what Daniel said too." Dalka exhaled slowly. "If she's telling the truth, we may have 7 graves out there." The next morning, under a pale, brittle sky, forensic teams arrived at the Bellamy property. Snow had frozen into a crust across the ground, and steam rose from the breath of men in orange parkas as they began their grid search. Nora stood beside Dalka at the edge of the orchard. He held the tin of photographs in one gloved hand. "We'll start where you found this," he said. Hours passed. Shovels broke the soil in dull, rhythmic sounds. Dogs barked occasionally, their handlers moving between the rows of trees. Then, near the frost line, one of them shouted. Dalka and Nora ran. The earth had given way to something pale. Cloth, tangled roots, and a suggestion of bone. The sheriff signaled for the digging to stop. Carefully, the team brushed away the soil until the outline of a small skeleton emerged, curled on its side, hands near the face. Nora pressed a fist to her mouth. "How old?" "Rough guess," said one of the technicians. 10, maybe 11. "There's a necklace, small cross." Silver. Dalka looked at Nora. "That fits Ruth Bellamy's description." Before they could speak again, another shout came from across the orchard. Then another. By dusk, they had uncovered 6 shallow graves, each holding the remains of a child. 7 cousins had vanished. 6 had now been found. The coroner's van departed under the fading sky. Snow began again, soft and soundless. Nora and Dalka remained by the last open grave, the 7th unmarked space still undisturbed. "We'll keep digging tomorrow," Dalka said quietly. Nora nodded, though her gaze lingered on the dark soil. "It feels incomplete, like the last one's still here watching." Dalka didn't answer. He turned toward the barn, where a single light burned from inside. "Generator?" Nora asked. "No," he said. "That bulb's been dead for years." They entered cautiously. The air smelled of damp wood and rust. Old tools lined the walls, and hay crunched beneath their boots. The light came from a single hanging bulb above the loft ladder, flickering weakly. Nora climbed halfway, before she froze. On the far wall, carved into the boards, were words scorched into the wood. "The hollow feeds." Dalka joined her, shining his flashlight over the letters. "He must have burned it in himself," he said. "Daniel?" "Has to be. He hung himself from that beam up there." Nora's gaze drifted toward the rafter, where a rusted hook still swung faintly. She whispered, "What did they feed it?" Dalka turned off his flashlight. "Let's not answer that tonight." They left the barn in silence, the storm rising around them. By the time Nora reached her car, her fingers were numb. She sat behind the wheel and watched the wind thrash the orchard until her vision blurred. That night, in her motel room, she replayed the audio she'd recorded earlier. At the edge of the clip, barely audible beneath the static, she heard something, a faint whisper. She boosted the volume, isolating the noise. Seventh sleeps deeper. Her skin prickled. The whisper wasn't hers, and it wasn't Dalka's. Morning broke in pale sunlight. The storm had passed, leaving a glassy glaze of ice over everything. Dalka was already at the site when Nora arrived. "We dug again," he said. "We found the seventh." They stood before a small grave at the edge of the orchard, near a withered peach tree. Unlike the others, the coffin, if it could be called that, was metal, sealed and rusted shut. Dalka tapped the lid with his boot. "Not homemade. Manufactured. Someone went to trouble for this one." When they pried it open, the cold air rushed out like a breath. Inside lay not a skeleton, but a preserved child's body, skin waxen, eyes closed. The preservation was unnatural, the kind seen only in chemical embalming. A locket rested against the throat. Nora leaned closer. The initials etched on it read, R.B. "But we already found Ruth," Dalka murmured. Nora's breath fogged. "Then who is this?" Beneath the child's hand was a folded paper, sealed in plastic. Dalka used tweezers to lift it out. He unfolded it carefully. The ink had bled, but one line was still legible. "One was never meant to sleep." That night, Nora couldn't stop seeing the child's face. She drove to the Bellamy farmhouse again, unable to shake the feeling that something waited there. The moon hung low and white over the orchard. Inside, dust drifted like snow. The air was heavy with rot and memory. She found the family photographs still hanging on the wall. Daniel, his wife Clara, and the 7 cousins. Her gaze froze. There were 8 children in the picture. She counted again. 8, not 7. The 8th stood slightly apart from the others, a blur near the back, unlabeled, face obscured by shadow. Nora took a photo with her phone and backed away. Outside, something moved among the trees. A pale figure, small, barefoot, drifting between the rows of apple trunks. Nora stepped toward the window. The figure paused, turned. Even through the frost-streaked glass, she saw its eyes open, milky white, reflecting moonlight. And then it was gone. The next morning, Sheriff Dalka found her sitting on the farmhouse porch, blanket around her shoulders, a camera clutched in both hands. "There's an 8th, she said. Dalka frowned. "What?" "In the photo, there's an 8th child. Nobody ever mentioned another." He studied her face. "You're sure?" She handed him the picture. "Look behind Ruth." There Dalka squinted. "Could be a trick of light." "It's not." Nora's voice trembled. "I saw her last night." In the orchard, Dalka's expression darkened. "Saw who?" Nora met his gaze. "The one who was never meant to sleep." The wind stirred the frost-coated branches, and from somewhere deep in the orchard came the faint sound of laughter, childlike, echoing between the trees. Morning light filtered weakly through the curtains of Nora's motel room, turning the air a dull gold. Her notebook lay open beside her on the nightstand, filled with frantic scribbles, written in the early hours. Half-thoughts, fragments of what she'd seen, or believed she'd seen. The 8th child. She had counted 7, her entire life. The legend said 7 cousins vanished, but the photograph from the Bellamy house showed 8. The blurred girl in the background lingered in her mind like a smudge on memory. Nora replayed the footage from her camera. The orchard shimmered under moonlight. Then, a figure, small, barefoot, face white as frost, and gone. She froze the frame and zoomed in. The image degraded into digital noise, but the faint outline of a child's hand seemed to press against the lens before fading into static. Her phone buzzed. "Sheriff Dalka." "You'd better come to the station," he said. "Something's happened to the coroner's van." By the time Nora reached the sheriff's office, the mood was grim. Dalka stood by a corkboard, crowded with photographs from the orchard dig, each one labeled in neat black ink. "The van never made it to Austin," he said. "Driver was found on Route 12, engine running, doors locked, no bodies in the back." Nora blinked. "All 6? Gone?" He nodded. "Van doors were forced from the inside. Locking mechanism bent. No footprints except the driver's." Nora felt her stomach twist. "So, someone took them. After death." "Or," Dalka said slowly, "they weren't as dead as we thought." The words hung in the air, absurd and terrible. Nora laughed once, nervously. "You don't believe that?" He didn't answer. They drove back to the Bellamy property, under a sky thick with cloud. The frost was melting, the ground soft beneath their boots. Every step seemed to echo. Dalka led her to the orchard's edge, where the 7th sealed coffin had been found. The soil was disturbed again, loosened, clawed at, as if something had pushed upward from beneath. "Animals?" Nora asked, though her voice shook. "Not unless animals use both hands," Dalka said, pointing to the marks, 5 fingers etched in parallel grooves across the frozen earth. She crouched, touching one impression. It was narrow, delicate, unmistakably human. "Why would anyone dig up one body?" she whispered, "when 6 others disappeared already?" Dalka rubbed his temple. "Unless that one wasn't supposed to be buried." That afternoon, the forensics team returned to re-examine the site. They found more. Shallow footprints leading from the 7th grave toward the tree line, then vanishing in the thawing mud. Hazel Mercer's words echoed in Nora's mind. "The orchard remembers." The sheriff's deputy approached, holding a weathered metal tag. "Found this near the tree line," he said. "Could have come from one of the old storage crates." Nora took it. The tag was brass, stamped with a serial number, number 8-0-1-R. And beneath it, faint engraving barely visible through the tarnish. "Ash Hollow Orphanage." She looked at Dalka. "There was an orphanage here." He shook his head. "Not here. About 3 miles north, burned down in '69. My dad said it was closed after a fire killed half the kids. The rest were fostered out." Nora felt her pulse quicken. 7 cousins, and 1 orphan no one remembered. That night, she sat in the motel parking lot, engine running for warmth. Her recorder blinked red. Recording on, Nora Quinn. Day 6. Evidence suggests the 7th grave contained a body that may not have belonged to any known cousin. A missing 8th child, possibly linked to Ash Hollow Orphanage. Corpses removed from coroner's custody. Unknown parties. Sheriff Dalka suspects inside tampering or something. Else? She stopped, the word catching in her throat. Something else. Outside, snow drifted again, fine as dust. The orchard loomed in the distance, dark against the horizon. She thought she saw a flicker of movement there, a shadow between trees, and quickly turned off the lights in her car. For a moment, nothing. Then faintly, a child's voice, singing. "Ring around the hollow. Ashes in the ground." The melody was off-key, distant, carried by the wind. Nora gripped the steering wheel. "You're tired," she whispered to herself. "You're hearing echoes." But the voice continued, clearer now, closer. 7 down, 1 to keep. The song broke into laughter that didn't sound like a child's at all. She went to Dalka's house before dawn. He opened the door wearing his holster and a haunted expression. "I heard it too," he said before she could speak. "Out by the barn." Together they returned to the Bellamy property. Mist clung to the ground like low smoke. The orchard looked skeletal in the early light. The barn door was ajar. Inside, the air was heavy and still. A faint metallic smell drifted down from the loft. Dalka climbed the ladder first, gun drawn. "Stay back," he warned. But Nora followed anyway. The sight froze them both, all 6 of the missing corpses, propped upright against the far wall. Their skin waxen, eyes open. Each held something in their hands, old toys, ribbons, a cracked marble, and across their chests, carved with precision, were Roman numerals, 1 through 6. On the beam above them, someone or something had scrawled a new message in what looked like dried blood. The 8th keeps the hollow. Nora felt the room tilt. Oh, God! Dalka swallowed hard. Who brought them here? Before she could answer, the faint sound of laughter echoed from below, near the orchard. They ran outside. The frost was breaking as they reached the trees. Sunlight fractured through the branches in thin, trembling lines. At the far edge of the orchard stood a child in a pale dress, hair tangled, bare feet black with mud. Nora stopped. It's her! Dalka raised his weapon. Don't move, he shouted. The child tilted her head, eyes blank as glass marbles. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Only a trickle of soil spilled from her lips, dark against the snow. Dalka took a step forward. The ground beneath him gave way, with a sharp crack, and he dropped to his knees. The soil split open, exposing the faint outline of a pit beneath. Nora! He shouted, before the earth swallowed him up to the waist. She lunged, grabbing his arm, pulling with all her strength. The pit yawned wider. Beneath him, dozens of skeletal hands clawed at the surface, thin as branches, grasping. Dalka screamed. Nora hauled him out, just as the ground collapsed entirely, revealing a chasm filled with bones, tiny, countless, tangled in roots. She staggered back, gasping. The child was gone. Only the orchard stood silent, wind whispering through its frozen branches like breath. Hours later, as emergency crews filled the property, Nora sat wrapped in a blanket near the edge of the field. Dalka was alive but shaken, his leg badly bruised. A deputy approached. Ma'am, we found something at the bottom of the pit. He handed her a small sealed evidence bag. Inside was another brass tag, identical to the one found before, except this one read, number 8-0-2-L. Dalka leaned over. There's more of them. Nora looked toward the orchard, where men were marking new excavation points. How many children were at that orphanage? Dalka hesitated. 72. But only 49 graves were ever found. Nora's hands trembled. Then this isn't just about 7 cousins. The sheriff nodded grimly. It's about what Ash Hollow was built on. That evening, she sat alone, voice recorder on. Recording, final log, day 6. If anyone finds this, the orchard isn't what it seems. The disappearances weren't isolated. There were others, dozens. The 8th child isn't missing. She's still here watching. The ground doesn't forget. It feeds. The lights flickered. In the corner of the room, a small shape shifted. The air grew cold. Nora turned slowly. A child's silhouette stood by the wall, head tilted, dress dripping with mud. Who are you? Nora whispered. The girl smiled faintly. You came to dig. Then she vanished, leaving a trail of damp footprints across the carpet that led to the window, and stopped. Outside, the orchard swayed under the wind, its branches creaking in rhythm, like something breathing just beneath the soil. The storm returned that night, black and heavy, as if the sky itself were collapsing over Ash Hollow. Rain lashed the windows of Nora's motel room, and thunder rolled in long, low growls across the hills. The power flickered twice, then failed entirely, plunging the room into darkness. Nora sat on the edge of her bed, flashlight in one hand, the brass tag in the other. Number 8-0-2-L glimmered faintly in the beam. Her recorder lay beside her, blinking red. Recording on Day 7. We uncovered what seems to be a burial pit, possibly connected to Ash Hollow Orphanage. Sheriff Dalka and I believe the 7 cousins were only the beginning. The 8th child. She isn't gone. She's here, bound to this ground somehow. I don't know what that means anymore. A soft thunk sounded against the window. Then another. Nora turned off the flashlight. For a moment, silence. Then tap, tap, tap. From the glass. She approached slowly, hard hammering. Outside, raindrops streaked down in silver threads. Something small struck the pane again and slid out of view. She opened the curtain. Apples. Rotten. Black with rot. Falling from nowhere. The motel's parking lot was littered with them, their pulp steaming in the cold rain. Her phone buzzed violently. Sheriff Dalka. "We've got a problem," he said, voice tight. "The orchard's moving." By the time she reached the Bellamy property, the wind was howling. Patrol cars lined the drive, their red lights diffused by mist. Officers stood near the orchard's edge, their flashlights sweeping over a landscape that looked alive. The trees were shifting, roots heaved beneath the soil, cracking through frost and mud. Branches twisted like arms, reaching toward the sky. The air reeked of iron and decay. Dalka limped toward her, rain slicking his hair to his forehead. "Started an hour ago," he shouted over the wind. "Ground keeps opening, closing again, like it's breathing." As if to prove him right, the soil at their feet bulged upward, then collapsed with a wet sigh. Nora stumbled back, flashlight shaking. From somewhere deep within the orchard came a sound, a hollow, rhythmic pulse. Not thunder, not wind, something older. "The hollow feeds," she whispered. Dalka met her eyes. "Then we stopped the feeding." They fought their way toward the barn, mud sucking at their boots. The light inside still burned, though no one had entered since the corpses were recovered earlier that day. When Dalka pushed open the door, a wall of heat hit them, air thick and damp, the smell of rot unbearable. The 6 children's bodies were gone again. Only their clothes remained, pinned to the wall by rusted nails, fluttering gently as though moved by breath. Nora's light caught movement. Across the floor the soil was rising, small mounds forming in uneven rows. She counted them. 1, 2, 3. Dalka grabbed her arm. "We need to get out. Now." But the barn doors slammed behind them with a force that rattled the boards. A whisper rolled through the room, layered, indistinct. Dozens of voices speaking at once. "Stay. With us." The ground split open. Fingers, thin, gray, and impossibly long, pushed through the dirt, followed by arms, faces, children's faces. Their eyes were milky white, mouths filled with soil. Nora screamed as one of the figures reached for her leg, nails scraping her boot, while Dalka fired his revolver once, twice. The sound barely registered. The children didn't bleed. They simply crumbled into ash and reformed again, crawling closer. "Back door," Dalka shouted. They stumbled toward the rear exit, shoving it open and spilling into the rain. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the orchard, trees twisting, branches bending low, as if bowing toward the earth. At the center of the field, the 8th child stood waiting. She was small, maybe 10, the same pale dress. Mud streaked her legs to the knees. She watched them without blinking. Around her, the earth trembled, the roots of the trees coiling toward her like veins. Dalka raised his gun. "Stop right there." The girl smiled faintly. "You can't stop what's already been fed." Her voice was wrong, layered, deep, too many voices speaking through her. Nora stepped forward. "Who are you?" "I was never meant to sleep," the girl whispered. "They buried me anyway." Thunder boomed. The ground around her erupted, skeletons clawing upward, bones clattering like hailstones. Dalka fired again, then another shot. The bullets vanished into the storm. The girl tilted her head, eyes pale as fog. "You dig. You always dig." Nora dropped to her knees, shouting over the wind. "What do you want?" The girl's expression softened almost sadly. "Remember us." Then the ground collapsed beneath her, swallowing her whole. The orchard groaned, a sound like thousands of voices exhaling in unison. The trees bowed once more, then went still. Rain hissed down. The wind died. The world went quiet. It took rescue crews until dawn to reach them. The orchard had settled into eerie calm, as if nothing had happened. The soil was smooth again. No graves, no holes, only the faint scent of earth newly turned. Nora and Dalka sat in the back of an ambulance, blankets around their shoulders. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Nora broke the silence. They weren't haunting the place. They were the place. Dalka looked at her, eyes hollow. The hollow feeds, because it remembers. They watched as the first light of day touched the orchard. Frost glittered on every branch, each drop of water catching the sunrise like glass. For a moment, it looked beautiful again. But Nora saw it, the faintest movement beneath the soil. A breath. Weeks passed. The town of Ash Hollow made national news for a while, then faded again into rumor. Excavations were halted by state order. The site was deemed unstable, unsafe for further exploration. Official reports cited subterranean collapse due to geological erosion. Nora stayed long after the cameras left. She wrote, she interviewed. She dreamed of children singing under the apple trees. Dalka retired early, moved south. The last time Nora saw him, he said he sometimes still heard the whisper of roots when the wind picked up. He didn't return to Ash Hollow. She did. Late one evening, months later, Nora walked the orchard alone. The trees were bare, snow unbroken, except for her footprints. She stopped where the seventh grave had been, the one with the metal coffin. In the distance, something small glimmered beneath the frost. She brushed away the snow. A locket. The same one she'd seen before, initials barely visible, RB. When she opened it, the photograph inside wasn't of a child. It was of her. A chill spread through her chest. She looked around, suddenly aware of how silent the orchard was, how each tree seemed to lean inward toward her. Behind her, a child's voice whispered, "Now you remember." The wind rose, carrying the smell of earth and peaches and decay. Nora turned toward the sound, but there was no one there, only the trees, and beneath them, the faint shifting of soil. The hollow had awakened, and it was hungry again. Spring returned to Ash Hollow. The grass grew thick along the highway, covering the scar where the bridge once stood. The county fenced off the land, posted a sign that read, "Condemned, no trespassing, unsafe terrain." Most people drove past without slowing, but every so often someone stopped. Nora did. Her rental car idled at the shoulder, while the wind pushed waves through the tall grass. It had been 6 months since the night the orchard opened. 6 months since Sheriff Dalka disappeared into early retirement, and since the state sealed every record of the case. Her book lay on the passenger seat, a thick draft, bound in clips and notes. The Hollow remembers. It wasn't finished. It couldn't be. There was no ending to tell. She stepped out and walked past the fence. The sign's chain rattled behind her as she crossed the flattened bridge site. Wildflowers had already taken root where bones once surfaced. The earth looked peaceful now, but she knew the calm was a lie. She reached the orchard near dusk. The trees were green again, healthy, vibrant, as though reborn. Apple blossoms filled the air with a sweetness that almost masked the smell beneath. that faint metallic tang she could never forget. The rows were perfect, symmetrical, and quiet. No birds sang here. At the center clearing stood the last surviving tree, gnarled and hollow at the trunk. Its branches spread wide, leaves whispering softly. She touched the bark. Beneath her palm she felt a faint vibration. Not wind, not roots shifting. A heartbeat. She whispered, "I remember." A small voice answered from inside the trunk. "Good." She knelt, heart hammering, and peered into the hollow. The darkness inside pulsed faintly, the rhythm steady and slow. Something glimmered within, metal. She reached in and drew it out. Another brass tag, cold and damp. Number 8-0-3-Q. Her initials. By nightfall, fog rose again across the field. The orchard swayed as though listening. She set her recorder on the grass, clicked it on for one last entry. Recording on. This will be my final note. The hollow is alive. It's not a curse, it's memory. The children, the workers, the land itself. They became one thing. The town fed it, buried it, built over it. It remembers everything we take and everything we forget. The seventh sleeps deeper. The eighth keeps the hollow. Maybe that was always me. Maybe the land only wanted a witness. Her voice trembled, but she kept speaking. If anyone finds this recording, don't dig. Don't come here. Let the ground keep its secrets. Wind rose through the trees, low and steady, almost like breath. She placed the tag inside the trunk and stepped back. The earth around her softened, small ripples spreading through the grass. She could feel it under her feet now, warm, familiar, like home. The orchard whispered her name once, Nora. Then it went still. The next morning, hikers found the recorder sitting at the base of the old apple tree. The tape was blank, except for one sound, a faint heartbeat that faded into silence. No one ever saw Nora Quinn again. When the county surveyors returned that summer, they found the orchard had spread, 2 new rows of young trees where there had been none before. Each trunk bore a small brass tag nailed to the bark. The numbers ran in sequence, and beneath the soil, something moved when the wind blew, softly like breathing, waiting for someone else to remember.